Hello and welcome to the Monopath podcast. I am joined by Ed Heaton today, who some of my listeners may recognise the name of. He's been producing records in Leeds for over a decade now. And we briefly discussed some of those records in the podcast and some of the ones that have really stuck with Ed over the years. But if you don't know Ed from record production, you really could have come across him any number of ways if you have lived in or have been around Leeds any time within the last 15 to 20 years. He's done some charity work with various organisations. He's produced records, he's put on music events, he's really done quite a lot for the arts in Yorkshire in general. And so this conversation really could have gone anyway. I feel as if we meandered our way around the whole lot. We kind of covered Ed's taste in music, his record production, and mostly focused on his songwriting for his new music publishing company, Feel Good Music. You'll have to bear with, in some instances, me and Ed both compete and fight over one another to get a word in. We're both chatterboxes who are coming at music seemingly from very different angles. I describe myself later on as someone who's quite detached from their emotions, compared to Ed, who is openly embracive of his. Just some stuff to mention before I introduce you to Ed. I mention this in practically every podcast, but if you are enjoying what you hear, it really does help if you could just take a few, even just a minute of your time, just to leave a review on iTunes for the podcast. That is one of the things that prospective guests look at to decide whether they will come on the show or not. So if you would like me to keep up the calibre of guests that I've had so far, then these small little gestures help, particularly when I'm speaking to people who I've never met before. Other than that, you can still shop with Arthur of Teaco, which is the tea company that I run. We're just about to launch some of the Christmas blends. I think at the time of publishing this, they'll be about there. At the moment, we've only just put out the Halloween blends, but there's a lot going on behind the scenes with that. I'm about to start back at university for my final year of my Masters in Philosophy. I'm doing my dissertation. I have no idea how preoccupied I will be with these things, but hopefully it will not affect the podcast in a negative way. We'll see, and I'll try my best to keep up with it all. I'm really enjoying doing it, so I think it would be to my own suffering if I stop. And anyway, I think that's everything you need to hear from me. So without further fussing, I bring you Ed Heaton. Ed, welcome to the Monopath podcast.
Thank you for having me. Nice to see you, Darren.
Yes, always very nice to see you. And it's actually been quite a long time, I feel. I say this to everybody. It feels like it's been a long time since I saw another human being. So
yeah. I've only just started entering sort of back into the world a bit, which is obviously ironic because they're about to shoot it again. So yeah, it feels like what I'm doing is kind of gathering faces before I have to sort of say goodbye to them again.
Yeah, well, you do right. You have just started a music publishing company, which is what prompted me to get in touch, because it just seemed like a big deal and it looked all polished and nice. So I wondered if we could just begin by you just letting everybody know what it is you're doing there. It's with Narelle as well, right?
It's with Narelle. Yeah, it's the brilliant Narelle Hill, who is, I think just she's one of the most talented people I've ever met. She's a naturally gifted songwriter. She just understands melody like better than anybody I know. I can have an idea for a top line and then I'll send it to Rel and it will come back at least 1,000 times better than my idea. And that's so that's really exciting. So there's Narelle and there's a guy called Chris Clark, who Swiss Chris, because he lives in Switzerland, and he's also a songwriter, and we started Feel Good Music Publishing, and we specialise in songs for sync. So we write, rather than it being music, because a lot of time music, it tends to be music for synchronisation. So synchronisation being music that you put to television or film or adverts or video games. So anything kind of moving picture and music, that's what's called sync. And then and we specialize in songs for sync.
Nice. And it's quite an eclectic range of styles on there as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I mean, because we're all into everything, it's sort of like, it's that thing where, I mean, it's interesting because I think there's definitely an idea when you're doing what we're doing is that there's a, see you later, there's a lack of sort of artistic drive behind it, that it's done purely for commercial reasons, because people assume that everything you do is for a level, there's a level of artistry in music that you release as an artist, if that makes sense. But actually everything we do because we love it and we really enjoy it, and we're really proud of it, and we have a very strong A&R process, and we have a saying which says it starts with the song. So the song is the key. Absolutely, if the song's no good, then the rest of it can just go fly. It's like that's the thing that matters to us. So yeah, we use this as our way to actually be completely artistically free. We can actually write the songs we want to write, and kind of be the creators we want to be, but not be restricted by, I don't know, whims, or we can't do that because we're not that kind of band or not that kind of artist, or those restrictions that sometimes you can put on yourself because you feel you're already going to lose your audience by doing that. We don't have, I suppose
there is a kind of constriction when you're in a band, because you end up developing a style and that's just what you do. And you hear this all the time, artists who reinvent themselves on the next album lose a lot of their core fan base because the fan base just aren't connecting with that anymore. It's too different. And I would say you've kind of devised a solution to that problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it, and it's that I genuinely am, I will listen to everything from like to like 90s gangster rap through to Taylor Swift and Van Morrison and Aretha and Stevie and I don't know, like Bruce Springsteen, and I'm a musical magpie, and I see merit in all that music, and in music in general. I think music's really subjective, and I think and that's part of that is because you essentially are connecting with things emotionally, and so that's what the kind of music I'm writing is like. If I'm not feeling it when I'm writing it, it'll just get we'll put it to one side and move on, and because it should, and therefore if that's what's spurring me on creatively, really, is that if I'm listening to something that's making me excited, then I know it's good, or at least I think it's good.
With what you write, then, probably you compared to the rest of the group, do you write the same as what you listen to? Because you've got quite a wide range there of different genres and different things. You said you're like a musical magpie, but what comes out of having all those tastes of music?
I think that I can be quite disciplined in terms of that. I'll set out some, to write a pop song that I will want to write something that's kind of, because I'm kind of in the mood, sometimes it's just a mood thing. I'll want to write a song that's kind of like synth driven and with kind of like, big upbeat chorus and all that kind of stuff. And then other times I want to write something small and little and kind of heartfelt and, and delicate. And so I suppose, I think it does, but it invariably goes through my filter, and then because a lot of time we co-write as well, so it's not just going through my filter, it's going through Chris's filter and Narelle's filter, and so Chris will bring something that's really quirky. He tends to write he'll come from he'll just tip it slightly and make me go, oh, I wouldn't have said it like that, but I really like it. And he's got a real turn of phrase, and then Narelle will, then just kind of Narelle's like Narelle's like the mechanic. She'll just tighten everything up, and she just go, hey, that's fine, but let's lose that word and that chord and that thing, and so yeah, we all, because
I think sorry to interrupt there.
That's all right.
I feel like a lot of people know you from a rock background, like producing rock records and working in live music usually entails it being more centered on guitar driven performance.
Yeah.
Is that, I suppose I'm asking you a question about like what your stamp is in the project and what your signature is when you write music. I feel like you kind of probably roundabout answered that, but maybe I've clarified the question. It makes it a bit tighter.
I suppose I think it's interesting because and it's funny you should say that, because it's one of the conversations I'm having at the moment with Andrea, my wife, who's and kind of the people around me. Is that one other thing I've realized is that because when I started making music, it was me making music as a kind of artist and creative and learning how to produce. And that was largely through program beats. And that was because I was really into like hip hop, and I was really into kind of like Massive Attack, Portishead, and then kind of like the whole kind of like sort of lounge sort of sound of the early noughties, late 90s, early noughties, sort of Air and, that kind of stuff. So I was sort of really into that kind of hybridy sort of beat making music, and then started a studio, and then got into and just started producing artists. And really I was, when I'm the rock stuff tends to be servicing other people's songs, that I'm being their producer and I'm making their tracks sound hopefully what's in their head. I'm sort of interpreting that and kind of making it a reality. Where with my stuff is that actually I suppose it's that's my voice, or certainly our voice collectively, because I don't want to say, because that everything is mine, it's ours as a collective unit. And so in fact I would argue really the stuff that I'm making now is probably more reflective about who I am as a writer, if that makes sense. That's not to do any disservice to any bands I produce or anything like that, because that's their music. As the producer, I'm there to service them. I'm not there to kind of put my ego. My job is to be invisible. When I think a good producer, your job is when someone listens to an album by a band and they go, that band are amazing. Not, wow, that producer's amazing. They go, that band's amazing. The producer should be largely invisible, I think.
There's a lot of different production styles as well, and not every producer would agree with that. I'm somewhere in the middle, I think. I probably learned the most about myself when I started producing records, and specifically in regard to the sort of questions I'm thinking about now. When I was making records, it was easier to say and look at, okay, this is what I do. This is my thing. So I know now that I'm not really good at following trends, and I'm not very good at writing on the mark pop music, let's say. Everything I do seems to be shifted a couple of degrees to the left, so it ends up being a bit more complex and a bit more novel. Almost, you might say, a bit out there sometimes, but there's something poppy there. Like, I've got a good ear for pop, but I like surprise. Like, I like to be surprised by music, and I like to feel like I'm doing something that I haven't heard before. And when I like music, it's the same.
It's interesting because I think I'm almost the opposite. I've realized what a pop kid I really am. Like, I love the narrative journey of a pop record. I want that big chunky, I want the big fat sandwich at the end, that chorus at the end where I'm like face down in it. And that's actually, I think that's really, I think as a creative, I think to realize that they're your not, and rather than kind of go, oh, that's bad, or that's, that's, and kind of go, okay, that's cool. And then you're not always going to work with, I've worked with bands who, who do really surprising stuff and have done really surprising stuff, and make you go, oh, that's, and I've loved that, and I've loved that challenge of working with those bands. I think specifically Narcs, I'd be thinking of, who I worked with, who write anything but straightforward pop records, and that was probably one of my most favorite albums that I've ever done. But then, and I worked with Happy Daggers, who were like, really kind of funk, driven, and really kind of pop edged, pop tinged, and I love that too. So I don't know. It's also, I think, about relationships as well. When you're working with other people, it's about that conversation working. So whether or not, you specifically would make that record yourself as a producer, I think that's irrelevant. I think it's about whether or not you can make it relevant to a wider audience outside those core people who are making that record, and maybe you're the conduit to it.
It's that self-knowledge as well that's helpful. I think I look at it now as that, because I know these things about my own style and how I write music and what ends up coming out at the end of it, I have a better sense of who I should collaborate with. So, for example, I'm no use collaborating with somebody who wants to write prog music, because it will just go off the radar. I'm much better at writing with somebody who's got like a pop mind, like you said you have. That works better for me because they kind of rein in my ideas and they stop it being so zany and so out there, and they start making it a bit more palatable for a general audience. So I think that's that thing of self-knowledge, of like self-discovery when you're for me when I was a producer, but I think you can do this at any stage if you just pay attention to what you're doing. So you kind of find that out and kind of go, I do that, or I work well with this kind of person. What is it that they're doing that works?
I mean, I think it's also about the kind of, I suppose it's about, for me, that I'm essentially just constantly flicking through an internal catalogue, like the records that I've listened to. And ultimately in my head, I'm really just kind of magpieing from 1,000 different records at once. And that might not be obvious to the listener, but like, like I'm thinking of the reverb on the vocal for one track. And then, and I think all those things can actually tie up into something that maybe you wouldn't have done, particularly if you're collaborating, that you might not have done in your own, but actually when you find, like, so with the stuff we're doing, Feel Good, like the so Chris, who is my songwriting partner, that's my daughter in the background there. I'm just going to move this over a little bit. So Chris, who's my one of the partners, he has an act called Outcast Angels, and they do this kind of like hardcore, like kind of riff-driven rock, like with Chris singing this very kind of high, kind of really powerful voice, and it's very sort of like big riffs and stuff. And then they gave it to me and said, okay, what are you going to do with it? And I was like, okay. And I just put on these massive beats, huge. And it just was like, and like, I'm not sure on my own I would have made that record, but together we made it. And I love it. I'm like really proud of it. And that's really exciting to kind of go, to know that you're making records that maybe individually you would have stopped yourself making them for the million reasons that you either not confident enough to, or that it's not music you particularly think you like very much, because you do that arbitrary thing about, I'm not really into that, particularly, or whatever, for the 1,000 reasons. But then that you find yourself making those records, and it's actually really, really exciting, and you find yourself going new musical journeys.
Yeah, I that still seems to me that's I'm on the same page, because that sounds like surprise. When I'm using the word surprise, that's what I'm looking for. And when I've collaborated, and the best collaborations I've had are the ones where I've been surprised and I've gone into some songwriting episode and something's come out at the end of it that I never would. There was something about being in that room with those people that changed me. As pretentious as that sounds.
No, I know what you mean. Yeah, and like, because humans are really adaptable as well. Like we're not just one thing. We're not, we can really shift and change with the people we're with, and and we do all. And it's interesting because we see that sometimes as negative. Like it's very, they're like this around these people around this, like, you can see it as a negative thing. But I actually think it's a really positive thing, because that's how we be tolerant of other people, and that's how we fit in with other people, and that's how different people can move around. And I think that's the same creatively. If we just build up walls and go, I don't do that kind of music, and I don't deal with those, then we wouldn't have had albums like Blue Lines by Massive Attack if someone or like, I don't know, like all those great genre crossing records where he's like, that shouldn't have happened, but that did. And stuff that changed, actually, that changed things,
It's
and
like
even
sorry. Go on, sorry.
I was just saying, even the Beatles, going, okay, we're going to chuck a sitar on there, or we're going to try some loops out, or that kind of all that stuff.
Yeah, I do think there's two forces in songwriting that you've got to try and balance, right? And it's easier to do in a collaboration with somebody else. Like one of them is what I've just been talking about with like surprise, which previously I've referred to as novelty on the podcast. On the other side of it, you've got familiarity, and you're kind of just, it's the interplay with those two things that make a record a good record. If it's too novel, you end up having something that people just do not get. It's too ahead of its time, or it's too far in the past. And if it's too familiar, then it's just boring. So you've got to try and get the balance of those things. And I think that's really difficult to do in one person's head.
Yeah. And I think, I definitely work best collaboratively. There's no doubt about it, and I've found myself strengthened by that. And even as a writer so one of the loveliest things I've had recently happen, which was as a writer writing a record and then passed it over to the team who finished writing it. So it's been my kind of inception and largely my kind of baby, as it were. So we did a song called Let's Drive, and I kind of thought of the just started, so drafted the first verse and the chorus, and that kind of stayed as was really largely, and then Narelle added to it and Chris added to it, and then Narelle ended up producing it rather than me. And then, so therefore, and I've not really ever had that where I've always been the kind of main catalyst. I've always been like, oh, I've written it and I've produced it. And so to have a song then go and have another producer produce that record was totally new for me as a writer, and it was brilliant. And what Narelle did was just excellent. Like, it was really beautiful, and like super cool. Like, she's much cooler than I am, so like so like she just is, and like in all the ways, and that and it just came out just not how I thought it was going to be, but better for it, which was also really exciting. So yeah,
when you're in a collaboration, I suppose in any creative practice, like what's your first thoughts on trust and the value of it?
I think it's fundamental, and I think the need to be honest is really fundamental as well. I mean, I think that's not without being thoughtful and considerate, which I'm not always. Chris, my songwriting partner, will testify to that, because I'm, I can sometimes be fairly. He's always, because Chris is like, he's Canadian as Chris, and he's like naturally got that kind of like, he calls himself the diplomat, because he's just naturally diplomatic. And he's having to deal with two Northerners, like, who are just blunt, like, we'll just go, no, we don't really like that, and like, so we have to be sometimes mindful that we don't always do that. But yeah, no, but they also but knowing that they're not, that you can say, listen, this isn't what I was meaning when I started this. So you can pass it over your lyrics, and they go, I've done this, and you go, you know what, that's not what I wanted, and be honest about that, and that does come to trust, because that is trusting that they're not going to take the bat and ball home and go, I don't want to deal with you, and I don't want to work with you anymore. And from a production point of view, it's absolutely fundamental in terms of like when you collaborate with a band, or there's a moment. In fact, I've just been working with a guy called Tom Moon, who's in a band called Surefire Affair, and I produced Surefire Affair's album. And it was the second session that we did together, and they had a track called Telescope, and they played it to me, and they played it through, and they're in the studio, and I went, it's not quite right. And they were like, okay, what do you mean? It was like, you're promising this big build to this big explosion, and we never get there. You just keep building, but then you stop, and it's really frustrating. I want the payoff. And I worked with them on it, this payoff that I had in my head, and this idea that I thought, and it wasn't a fundamental change of what they were playing. It was just the rhythmically and kind of like the arrangement, really. And there was a point where they were getting and I was like, I knew I was this close to losing them. Like, it was like that, like the drummer, like Mark, who's just like a lovely guy, was just getting really pissed off with me, and I could feel it. And I actually had someone else who started helping me out, an engineer, and I looked at them and said, I know I've got 10 minutes more of this, and then we might be done. And I knew how close it was, but then they got it. And then I played it back to them, and they just were all like, oh my God, that's incredible. And then from that moment, it was like an open conversation. Like, they were like, Ed, what do you think? What should we do with this record? Because I pushed them, but the end result, and it became their favorite record on the album, which I was really pleased with. And like, we all talked about how that was a turning point for us in our relationship, because they began to trust me as a creative. Yeah. So yeah, for me, that was a turning point in a turning point in the album making process, was that they knew that when I suggested something, that I understood where this record could go.
Yeah.
And that was them putting interest in me.
Having something very similar. I produced a record by a band called Tropic of Youth. It was one of the most favorite things I ever did. One of the last things I did, actually, as well. And it was a very similar experience. I was very big on songwriting, because that's the thing I think I'm great at. I'm not great at a lot of things. I didn't think I was a great producer. I didn't think I was, great at any instruments.
I was always a really big fan of your production, by the way. I always listened to your production. I always thought it sounded absolutely great. It was so well, like it was beautifully polished. Your drums in particular were always brilliant.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah, I'll take that. I mean, that's a chapter in the past that's almost long forgotten now, but Tropic of Youth was a very, very fond memory, but we did have that kind of openness in... We started with the songs. I think it must be a very similar experience, and this will probably just sound very familiar to you, but they approached me to do a record. We did a single, and we got all the teething out the way, and then literally we went back to do an EP, and they bought me almost finished songs, and that was when we started. So the first week or something was just, let's work on the songs in the rehearsal room, and we shaped them, and we tweaked them, and we moved choruses around, and we changed this, and we changed that, and that was always what I loved doing. I loved the songwriting part of it, and it's like I knew what was good in my ears, and I knew how to get there in some sense, but I was always about the song, and I always thought the thing that I'm adding to this that others aren't is my taste in music and like my sense of good music. The reason I'm really adding that really is because I know you said earlier that you think the job of a producer is to kind of be transparent and to be like a ghost in the machine. But I don't know if that's technically true, because I think you must have a songwriting stamp that is there in the record.
Yeah, maybe. Like I suppose it's that thing where when it's like you know it's there though, but it's about not overshadowing the aesthetic of the band, I suppose, and the artists themselves.
Yeah, so it's a supplement to the band rather than something that's just overshadowing everything that they've done.
I suppose it's the difference between having like a featured producer, so like, you know, a Timbaland or a, you know, or the Neptunes, whatever, or, you know, listen to me dropping all the noughties references. But, you know, like, and kind of choosing them because you want your record to sound like those people, or you choose them because they're all, you know, someone like Stephen Street, who kind of basically, if you want an indie pop record, he's going to be the guy to go to, right? Because he's, you know, Blur and, you know, the Smiths and everyone else. And then, and, you know, so there's sort of genre producers, and then there's like actual sound producers, like you will get their sound. And yeah, I suppose it's about that, isn't it? And about where you sit. And I suppose I mean, for me, I don't think you don't have to be any of those things. You can be all those things, you know, slide scale. And I suppose it's about what the record's for, really. And ultimately, it's because I always think a record should serve a purpose. You know, it's like I'm not interested in so I'm in the 10 years between sort of not even 10, maybe even 15 years, so yeah, maybe 14 years in between sort of writing loads and not having a publishing deal, and then kind of to now having my own publishing company. I wrote probably about 10 songs, 11 songs. So in the space of 13 years, I wrote barely anything. And in the past 12 months, I've probably written, I don't know, co-written 40, 50 songs. Because I just never really wrote without any purpose. And I was never really into the idea of writing for no reason. Like, I never had that thing where I just needed to write. I need to write and create. I was like, you know, I was working on lots of people's records and I was involved with the creative process and it was great, but I wasn't interested in just writing for the sake of it. And then when I was given the opportunity to write for a purpose, then it was like, oh, right, okay, I can write. And it was almost like my brain needed that. It needed a purpose.
Yeah, it needed somewhere to, like a North Star, I suppose.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it needs a North Star. Yeah. And I suppose that's it, isn't it? Is that I suppose all creative projects need a North Star in whatever capacity, either as a producer or a writer, or, you know, whatever you're doing, you need that guiding. Where are we going with this? What's the end game, I suppose? And even if that, yeah.
I wonder if it's something with like making records or something, or working professionally in the music industry, because it killed my songwriting a little bit, or it certainly made it harder when I was full-time making records, sound engineering live, and that was what I was doing. In my spare time, I just didn't have the motivation or really the ideas to do anything with. It's like all that creative juice was just being pushed straight into somebody else's work.
Yeah, that's certainly how I felt. Yeah, and I was fine with that for a long, you know, and I kind of have been fine with that. I just the kind of need to write records was there because we were kind of like, the catalog and need to build the catalog and the kind of the publishing company. So it needed an extra writer and needed an extra pair of hands, and I was there and I could do it. And so it was like, okay, well, I've got a purpose now. I'm not, I think that thing where I know there's some people who feel they need to write and it's kind of an emotional, like they just have to do it. It's like it's a kind of impulse, and all hail to those people. That's great, and that but I don't need to write. But when I've got a purpose, although when I have a purpose, I do. When I know that there's stuff that I actually have an impulse to.
Yeah, when the meaning's clear.
When the meaning's clear, yeah, absolutely.
So with the collaboration then, I mean, because I wasn't really sure where this conversation would go and whether we would spend more time speaking about production or whether we would spend more time speaking about songwriting. As I already alluded to slightly earlier, is that I think most people would be surprised that you were such a good songwriter. Not because your records are terrible. I don't mean that at all. I mean... I just mean that you're known, I think it's fair to say you're known as a record producer, and not everybody realises what that job entails because there are so many ways to do it. Yeah.
And I mean, I'm still figuring that out in a lot of ways. And if someone said to me, where are the boundaries between a sound engineer and a music producer, I would say, so someone like, there's my dear friend Barclay McKay, who's a producer and engineer. He is very much, I would say, he's a sound engineer. Because he understands the internal workings of a machine. He knows why that machine is doing the things it's doing, not just what it does, but why it does it. So he has a fundamental understanding of the kind of like the mechanicals behind it, and that for me is an engineer. Like he understands the engineering of a record. Like he understands how it's literally physically made, where I'm very much more creative whimsy and like kind of like, oh, that would sound nice, like I'm not sure I will do it, but and throw some mics up and hope it sounds all right, and and I think both are valid. That's not a saying it's an either or. But yeah, I've found that there is. I mean, sometimes you're everything, and sometimes but sometimes a band want you to press record, say, yeah, that's good, maybe add a bit of guitar on that bit, and then shut up.
Yeah, I always hated those sessions.
I know, they're boring, weren't they?
Boring. I'm not good at it. I think I'm like you in that regard. I'm not I understand engineering to a degree that's enough to facilitate better songwriting and to make this production smoother, but I don't know enough to, say, build anything or solve really complicated problems. I'm just not great at that. It was never my thing. It was always this, I just fell back on this, like, I can do the songwriting. Everything else I'll learn enough, but it's the songwriting for me. So I always hated those sessions.
Yeah, me too. They always had more, and they were definitely a noise thing, like, because it was that time when everyone sounded like the Arctic Monkeys, and therefore everyone would sound like there was just two guitars and a drum kit recorded in a room. And like, it's interesting. I know people look very back fondly on those days, and and the music was great. Some of the music was great, but for a producer, they weren't fun times. The minute everyone wanted gated reverb drums again, we were laughing. It was like, wicked, now we can have some fun. Like the minute production values started going up again, no one wants, everyone wanted to sound more like, like, I don't know, Bruce Springsteen circa, like, Born in the USA, rather than, MC5. Then it became a lot more fun for us all.
There's a weird 80s renaissance going on at the moment, isn't there? So there's a lot of synthesizers back in pop music. In all music, to be honest. Even in rock music, you're noticing a lot of glossy production values with kind of... I think it's because, for me, as a guitarist and a bass player, pedals are so much fun and they're so good now, and you can get so much out of them that it's just a fun game. So actually that leads back into something I'd wanted to ask you about. Like, you sound a little bit like me, where it's quite intuitive, but are you a bit of an experimenter then, would you say, when it comes to songwriting? Do you just kind of have an intuition of like where to go and just follow this, not a very verbal idea, but just this intuition of like, this is the way to go?
Yeah, it's definitely, and it's all feel for me. It's rarely, like, I mean, I really don't have enough musical like knowledge to actually to articulate where I'd want to go with the record anyway. So it's always about like, oh, we need to just, yeah, it's always feel like 100%, and that can be like the feeling that a sound gives you as well. So like, I'll pick a synth or or a beat or whatever, and like as a starting point, and then that will give me a feel, and then I'll know what I want for the rest of the record very quickly, because that's giving me that.
It's funny you say that, actually. I hadn't thought of this in any of the podcasts I'd spoken about before, but I think I'm like that, because there's songs for me that have started literally with a feeling. I remember driving home from work once in the car, and so I work at Lush part-time. I did a few days there when I'm not on furlough. And they have this thing called Guerrilla Perfumes, and it's a kind of event that they do where they get musicians to compose music that sounds how the perfume smells, which is quite quirky.
Nice. Yeah, it's clever.
I do something very similar with my own tea blends. It's the same kind of concept that we just kind of both came to on our own. And anyway, I remember leaving work once, and they'd bought out a new one. It was called Goddess. And I'd been chatting about this Guerrilla Perfume thing, and I was driving home, and I thought, I wonder if I could write a song that sounds like that. And I mean, this is how I write a lot of my songs. Just in about 10 minutes on the drive home, I just started. And by the time I got home, I had a verse and a chorus and a pre-chorus just in my head, just fleshed out, because there was something about, it was quite like synth driven, quite pumping, and there was just something about that energy that felt right. But all I was starting with is, when I spray that perfume, how do I feel? But I mean, none of this was spoken. None of this was verbal in my head. I wasn't literally saying the words. It was just this feeling of starting with, how am I feeling when I smell this perfume, and where does that get me? What music comes out straight away without thinking about it? And there you go. Just a song fell out.
I mean, we write a lot around themes. So because in sync, there's kind of a lot of key themes. So it's kind of 25 key themes that exist in sync, which sounds really kind of, when you sort of say like, it sort of sounds really cold, like, oh, it's very calculated. But all it is kind of then what you do is you kind of go, what's the theme? And then you sort of tap into the emotion of that. And then you're digging yourself to find that kind of stuff. And I have no problem with having a starting point. And that something tends to wander in for me. Like, so I'll be a lot of time in the shower. Actually, I write a lot in the shower. I've written a lot of stuff in showers, and then I'll kind of flesh it out, and then which I shouldn't really say that, 'cause it sounds really rude. But I'll write in. I'll kind of, an idea will come in, and it usually be a phrase or just kind of like a collection of words or a turn of phrase that I like, and I'll start building around that. And then so it's so it depends if I start with the instrumental or the lyric first.
So you're writing the songs in the shower in the same way that I'm writing songs in the car?
Very much.
It sounds like it. It's funny as well, isn't it? Because I think a lot of people, perhaps those who aren't as maybe musically creative, would probably think what it is to write a song is to sit down at an instrument with some kind of preconceived idea and start playing it. I haven't really had that before.
I can and do that. So like because we have different so we have different genres in the catalogue. So I will sit down and go, I'm going to write so we've got a act called the Narcs, who are as named after Narcs, the Narcs, which is kind of like sort of Motown-y, Phil Spector-y girl group, sort of 60s girl group sort of sound. And so we're quite specific about what we want for that in terms of, so I will tend to write with the instrumental first with that stuff and sit down with a kind of like, I want to write this kind of record. So that would be preconceived in terms certainly of the feel of it. And I'll sit and listen to some stuff, so I'll sit and listen for, some Crystals and some Shirelles and, and kind of what are those things that make those, Supremes and, Martha Reeves and stuff like that, and kind of find out kind of what are the bones of that record. But it's always what's the making that feeling, what's the thing that's driving it. So and then I'll build from that. But then that. So yeah, I can do that as well. But so it depends. Yeah, but then a lot of time I will then give the instrumental to Chris and Narelle, and they'll start on the lyrical theme and the kind of melodic theme. So that's kind of different way of doing things, I suppose, because I'm providing the music. But then other times when I've written the words, Narelle will write the melody.
I feel like it must be really important in your case to have that North Star, if we'll continue that analogy, because the danger there is that, I mean, I've used this term prosaic art before, which what I mean by that is art where it is predestined to be something. So it's when you've got a really strict brief. The thing you were speaking about earlier that is quite difficult to do, about this is what you're writing the song about, it means this, go ahead and write it. That's really, really difficult to do. And I think when it comes out, there's something that strips away the organicness of that.
Yeah, I think it can if you're generic, but I think if you can find that personal within it, and I think that's so we were writing some songs during kind of lockdown. We were writing like a lot of songs about kind of like with some sort of, we knew there was kind of a call for kind of stuff that was kind of make people feel safe and okay, like, so we wrote these kind of very beautiful little, and so we were writing stuff with a very clear brief, which is kind of hopeful togetherness, and we were kind of writing for kind of in an adult contemporary style, so Sam Smith sort of Adele sort of stuff, that kind of some modern day ballad, I suppose, but I wrote a song called I Keep Traveling, which was written for my friend Sam, who is a jib operator. He's a brilliant camera operator, but like he basically saw his livelihood disappear, and so he went and got a job with Asda delivering food for people. So he lives in London. He's a professional. He works at like the highest level of his art industry, and he went and I don't know if I'd have the humility to do what he did, which was like he went and got a job for Asda driving and delivering shopping, and I wrote a song, and I thought about him in the van, and so while I was writing very on brief, I very much was writing from quite a personal place. It was for him, and I wrote specifically with Sam in mind, and I sent it to him afterwards, and he was really touched. And it was lovely. I wrote another song called "Keep Calling Out," which was written for my friend Molly, who she was alone during lockdown and was kind of getting in contact, and and it was just that thing of like, just keep asking for help, keep asking if you need it, we're here, like that thing. Like I wrote a song called Amplified Heart, which was about mental health, and these were all written for a reason. I knew what I was writing for. I was writing for these, but I still wrote from this kind of like, and that's not to say that we didn't write some stupid, and we wrote a song called Ooh La La, which is like where the chorus is, you make me go feeling like ooh la la, like, and it was, but I wrote it because I wanted to make a song that would make me laugh, that would make me go, oh, that's funny, and we do that, and yeah, I don't know, I think as long as you're writing with heart, and like that, if there is a preset reason that it's going to exist, that's the reason, but it doesn't mean that that what it contains doesn't mean anything. And meaning is arguably in either whole, or anyway, it's a crap and I hate it. That I think that song's got zero artistic worth, and they might hear Ooh La La and go, what a bag of shit, rather than that's kind of cheeky and funny, and we've also written songs like Can I Get a Clap, which I kind of started, and it's one of those weird ones where I was in a rehearsal room with some dancers, and Jack, who was one of the dancers, did this really amazing move, and everyone was and he finished, and he went, can I get a clap? I was like, that's amazing, and I ended up writing it as a kind of like anthem for like, so it's like all my, and I kind of wrote it with Narelle singing it in mind, so all my sisters marching with me, can I get a clap? Or all my brothers standing with me, can I get a clap? All those who are out and are free, can I get a clap? Like, and it's kind of supposed to be this kind of protest song, and I don't know, I suppose it's because you're a little. I think. So how would I put this? Like, I suppose you're always I always see songwriting as well as you're acting a little bit. You're putting on a character. You're because I'm not. Like when I'm writing from the point of view of my mental health, I'm not necessarily in that down point anymore. I've been there, but I'm not there anymore because I can write a song and if you're really depressed, actually it's very difficult to create. Or certainly I think for a lot of people it is. I don't want to presume. And in the same way that like I wanted to write something that had a voice for people that weren't particularly me, but I knew that Narelle would sing it, and I knew Narelle would add to it and put a stamp on it. And so I was careful not to be kind of culturally insensitive or appropriative, if that's a word. That I wanted to write something, but it's really it is. But you can play parts. You can.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, all of the performances that I do, I do think of them as performances when I'm doing my vocals, especially in any of the Arthur Dove stuff that I do now. It's the mood. Like, I feel like I'm in a character when I'm singing those parts. I don't always when I'm writing the song. I guess it's because, I mean, maybe it sounds like I'm turning my nose, but like some of the things I've called prosaic art, and I'm not trying to do that. I think it's probably that I just don't have that skill, and I'm envious of it. But I can't write to a brief. I can't do it. It's something maybe it's a skill that I could develop, but I can't do it. So whatever it is that you've got, it sounds from your description that you've got a very healthy relationship with taking a brief and not finding yourself in it, I guess.
Yeah, or finding the person. Maybe it's not even me, but someone I know in it. I think that's just. But
is it like something to sympathize with?
Yeah, I think so, because you need, like music's. I think, and it's one of the things that I really realized the more when you're trying to write something that's kind of essentially got a universal appeal or an air of universality about it, the more general you go, the least personal it is. So when you're trying to, like, I don't know, like I think of songs like, like Heal the World, it feels fairly glib, like that doesn't really feel like, but when, like, I don't know, you think about No Woman, No Cry, that feels really beautiful. And, that feels more because the idea of, I don't know, like when you try and write for everybody, you're probably going to write for nobody. But when you try and write, I always say the difference between, like, so for instance, Michael Jackson and Prince, and I'm sure people will disagree with me wholeheartedly, but the difference between Michael Jackson and Prince was that Michael Jackson wrote Heal the World, Prince wrote All the Flowers, all the flowers that you planted in the backyard died when you went away. Like he wrote about like little things. He wrote about starfish and coffee, and like, and and even in Sign of the Times, it's like, it was all little things. It was vignettes where, it was like, rather than kind of like heal the world, make it a better place for you and me and the entire human race. Okay, that doesn't, like,
I get you.
Yeah, yeah.
There's something trite about it, isn't there?
Yeah, and I'm not saying it came from a trite place, but it's just a bit like, well, who are you talking to there, man? Because like, there's a lot of us, where you write something that's little and kind of like, oh man, this is what it sounds like when doves cry, or like, oh god, like, maybe I'm just like my father, Too Bold, and I'm like, oh yeah, like, and I understand they as songs they're trying to do different things, and maybe they're not great ways to not great comparisons, but I suppose that's what I'm always interested in, the personal ultimately,
Yeah, for me again, that is that juxtaposition of familiarity and novelty. Those two side by side, one against the other, and it's like with the Prince examples that you said, they're really playing with novelty. They're doing something that's discreet and small and surprising, I guess, because you're not going to have heard another artist talk about doves crying. It's very much, it's so narrow and so specific that it's excluding a lot of other things. Whereas with the Michael Jackson examples, it's just so broad as to almost be like a platitude.
And yet he's one of his arguably his better songs, which he actually didn't write, with Saida Garrett and Glenn Ballard wrote, Man in the Mirror. And there's that lovely line about, I turn up the colour on my favourite winter coat, that this wind's blowing my mind. That's such a beautiful image, that, like that, like a summer's disregard, a broken bottle top, and one man's soul, like that's beautiful songwriting, because that's really little, but like there's a universality, and it's just gorgeous imagery, like it's like, really, yeah, it's that kind of like, it's that when you write something that's just like this big kind of like widescreen blur, like, and in a way that maybe that's, I mean, like, and I know it's very fashionable to take them, like, I think the reason why everyone loved kind of like Fix You by Coldplay was because it was about one person. It had that huge bigness about it, that big stadium, like, but ultimately it had that real, I'll try and fix you. And that was its cleverness, is that it sort of sounded like a juggernaut, but actually right in the middle was that kind of little, that will,
it's very delicate.
Yeah, there was a delicateness about it, and like, regardless of what people think of or don't think of them or that record, it was huge, and people really, 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 really connected with it. And same with, like, even songs like Thinking Out Loud by Ed Sheeran or whatever, like, I'm always fascinated by those songs, because they're so, the minute the kind of indie press and indie kids will go blah, horrible. Taylor Swift, who I love, I think Taylor Swift is genius, because she's brilliant, right? And she writes little, like, in her last album, there's a brilliant, yeah, I see you everywhere, I take the long way home, after traffic lights, it will be all right, they say I don't know. Like, that's just lovely, like, I just, yeah. And there's a quippiness about her writing that I think's really funny, and actually funny, novelty and fun, yeah. And like, there's a humor there which I love. Yeah, I think she's brilliant.
So what are you, I guess this is a question about your listening experience when you're listening to music. What is hitting you the most powerfully? Is it the lyrics, or is it something underneath it? Is it like the music or the tones, or it could be anything?
I think it's, sometimes it's a little melodic thing, like, I'm a sucker for like a bit sweet, man. Give me bittersweet, and I'm all in. Like, like the bittersweet is that's my, like, Dancing Years, who were a brilliant Leeds band, like, they did bittersweet like nobody. Here's to my old friend. Like, I'm talking about it and I'm getting emotional. Like I just think about that record and I start welling up. Because it's that thing of, like, just that somewhere between beauty and pain, that is just give me that and I will eat that all day long, like. But then I love hip hop, and like, so just give me, like, like DJ Premier is like the king of, like, just find the dopest loop and the fattest beat and just repeat ad nauseum, and it be RZA is the same as well. The RZA will, like, that texture and that dirt and that thing which makes you go, oh, and then add that with some incredible MCs, like, one of my favorite lyrics is by Inspector Deck on and it was on a really recent Wu-Tang track, and if weirdly back to Michael, I'm like miking the Billie Jean vid, I've got the street lit. I'm like miking the Billie Jean vid, I've got the street lit. That made me smile all day. I was like, game over, everyone just go home, we're all done here. That is just amazing. And so that kind of, I can really, there's a great line in fact, another Wu-Tang record, and it's Redman, who's technically more in Wu-Tang, and he's got, like, white folks love me like a Starbucks, like, just, that's just funny. But then there's also stuff like Taylor Swift recently. I love the on her latest song, she did a track with Bon Iver, which frankly for me is like, that is the meeting of two heavyweights songwriters for me. And there's a line in it, I can see you staring, honey, like he's your understudy, like you get your knuckles bloody for me. And I just thought, that's fucking brilliant. Like, there's so backstory behind those lyrics, like, and that idea of playing with guilt, like jealousy and anger and violence, and it's brilliant. And then he later on sings that wonderful line of, and it's the way he sings it as well, like the way he expresses Bon Iver, the way he expresses that voice he's got, and he sings, so step right up, there is no amount of crying I would do for you. I'm like, oh, it's just that. And I'm like, God, music still excites. Basically, I'm just a big fan of music who gets to actually make it. That's ultimately it. I'm just still a huge fan of music. Music still makes me just excited and cry and jump around. There's a great new record. I'm actually going to look for it. I heard the other day, and I was like, my God, it's like being in the 90s again. And I can't remember the name of it because I can never remember names of records. And I sent it to Matt, Matt Lazenby, who's my oldest and best friend, and we still send each other kids like songs like we're kids, and I sent him this, and it's the song's called Free, and it's by Salut, it's Salt, but spelled SAULT, and like the end of it, it's just an a cappella at the end, and it was like hearing something from like a track from the late 80s, early 90s, and it was like I sent it to him, and I said, just play this to the end and turn it up loud, and he sent me a message back saying, playing this on my speakers with crying happy tears. It's like that thing, if you're cynical about music, and cynical about the creative process, then that will come across. I'm still a kid. Music still surprises me constantly.
It's great, though. I was trying to get a read on you a little bit while you were talking there, and about how my experience connects with yours. For me, when I think of music as something that's a really good example of just art in general, because it's doing two things at once. There's like a pluralism in music that really isn't anywhere else, because you've got this sub layer, which is all of the tones, the energy, the music itself. And above that, kind of glued on top, you've got the poetry, the words, the lyrics, the verbal sorts of stuff. And that's a perfect analog for what people are like. You've got all of the real action going on in the subconscious, and it's non-verbal, and it's purely intuitive, and it's felt. And then just in this tiny fraction of what you're doing per day is this verbal, spoken thing that everything else gets filtered through while it just sits there observing it. And I feel like music is the perfect analog for that, because it's the same. When I listen to it, that's what I'm getting. When I listen to it, specifically, I get the subconscious stuff, and that's all I really get. Even when I get the lyrics, I don't hear the words. I hear the sounds and the shape of those words, and like the phonoaesthetics of it, and I really am quite late to get to grips with what it's supposed to mean given the lyrics. Where it sounds to me like you might be a bit different, and it's like you take it all as one big package, and it's just like things will just spontaneously poke out, and it might be a lyric, it might be something else, it might be a beat, it might be a feel.
Yeah, it's all that, actually. Yeah, it is, and it can be really different depending on the song. I can really. And that thing where you connect with something purely because it's got that moment, and I love songs with that. There's always that moment in a song when you go, oh, that bit, and it could be the bit where like Mike in the Billie Jean video got the streets lit, when you go, oh man, that's the best. Everyone stop rapping because Inspector Dex won, or there's that moment when Bon Iver goes, so step right up, there's no amount of crying that'll do for you, and you go, oh God, like that just outpouring he's done after this. And I love those moments. I just like just in this, and there's billions of them, there's a bit in there's a bit in the Love's in Need of Love Today by Stevie Wonder, which is just one of the most beautiful records ever, and will never stop making me cry. And there's a bit at the very end, and there's the whole bit, it sort of builds up, and then it does this drop down at the very end, this sort of extended drop down, where he's just sort of really riffing, he's just sort of almost like using his voice like an instrument. And then, and you can just hear him winding up to it, and he goes, L-O-V love, and like it's almost like a little, and then he just breaks out with this L-O-V, and it's like L-O-V love, and he just extends down. I've done it no justice there, by the way. And it is because everything's been quite just sort of a bit noodly at that point, and he just breaks out of that, and floors me I must have heard that record a billion times, and it just, when it comes, it's like,
I get a sense there that where we differ is that you're probably in closer connection with your emotions than I am, which I mean as a compliment, because I'm quite distant from mine. So almost uncomfortably so. Like, I'm a million miles away from how I feel sometimes, and it takes, if that is how I described it, and it's almost like a pipeline from feelings to thought, it's like the pipeline is a mile longer than it is for most people for me. And so, which is why a lot of people say, oh, he's very laid back. It's like really hard to kind of stir him and wind him up or anything like that. I feel like a very far removed from my emotions. So when I'm enjoying music, it's almost like I know I'm enjoying it or not, but it takes me a long time to figure out why.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Which is probably a good thing, because it's analytical, which is good.
Yeah. Whereas for you, it just seems different. It seems like the same process is happening, but the pipeline's shorter. So you kind of start with this whole song and you're just hearing the whole thing. And really, when a lyric means something to you or a vibe means something to you more than anything else, like that's being filtered up the pipeline, and that's your evidence. But you're able to get to it quicker and closer than I can. Like, you can just go, that's why I like that song. I like the song anyway, but this is my proof.
But the downside is that I am basically walking around having to deal with this kind of level of emotional, like all the time, which can be very tiring for everybody involved.
I think people would think it's the other way around though as well. I think if you tell them a lyric that you like and you go, that's why I love the song, they would think that you start with the lyric and then love the song. But it's not, it's the other way around. It's like you love the song and then you find the lyric and go, that's why. And it's like, that's kind of not why, but that's the best explanation that you can have for why.
Because I can't tell you that it's just actually just the shit, like the like you say, the tone of it sometimes, like that kind of thing where it can sit and just like, and
move you.
And sometimes it's just they've got the tempo right, and I just got like, I'm thinking about like the song called "You're Missing" by Bruce Springsteen, and it's just so like lolloping, they've got this violin that kind of like drunkenly almost like slurs its way through it, and it's about someone not being there anymore, and it's just and it sort of seems to exhume that kind of like ghostliness and slowness you feel with that sense of loss, that the world goes on but there's something missing, and therefore the world is slower and not as bright and not as clear, and it's clear. Yeah, there's just like that, and you can say, oh, that's very analytical, but it's like, it's just, but you react to it on a very emotional level, and there are scientific, everything can be broken down to kind of like, well, the reasons why is because it's rhythmic enjoyment, blah blah blah, and and we can certainly give it academic reasons, but it's pretty much emotion for me, or always, and that's I think that's true for everyone, really. Like, ultimately.
I do. I mean, I really stick by what I said earlier, and I've said it in other podcasts too. I do think there's a pluralism in people. I actually would go as far as saying there's two kinds of truths and way of speaking, way of communicating something true about the world. And one of them is what most people mean when they say something is true. And they mean it's articulated.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. It's articulated, it's verbal, and it's literally true. 2 + 2 = 4. Literally true. It's an analytical statement. On the other side of things, and it's something that I think we tend to disregard and ignore, is something that I've come to think of as like metaphorically true. I've heard it somewhere else. It's not I'm not coined that term, but what it means is that it's like artistically true. It's communicating something non-verbal. So when I hear music, there's something true in it, but I can't put it in. It's not intended to be communicated verbally or analytically. It's a different thing. And so the job of this podcast is to put things from one into the other. Like, I am talking analytically on the podcast about something that is fundamentally not analyzable.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's interesting you said, the math on, because Springsteen has this whole thing about 2 + 2 1 + 1. What is it? 1 plus 1 is 3. It's pure poetry. He believes 1 plus 1 equals 3 because it's you get two people and then you create this third thing, which I love, and it's like that's that, and he even says it in a song. But that idea that there's the logic and then there's the kind of the emotive logic, which is a whole different, almost a different conversation. And it's almost like there should be two schools of academia. There should be academia and there should be emotional academia. Well, I suppose, and in a way, I suppose that's where the whole kind of, arguably the whole investigation of mental health is coming from, is that realization that we can't just logic everything out. That actually we do need emotional intelligence because we don't deal with things on this kind of like the kind of pragmatic basis that are given us. We react to things on an emotive level, and that can sometimes not always be a healthy thing either. That can be a deeply unhealthy thing. Sometimes the emotional response can overtake everything, and actually you need that balance of both. You need that kind of like, and arguably that's true of songwriting, because you need that structure and you need that form and you need that sometimes that discipline, but then you go too far that way and then you end up with something that lacks the emotion. But then if it's all emotion, if it's all just like I'm just going to make noise into a record, then if it's formless and kind of like indulgent, then who's it for and what's it about? And actually, and there's the argument it should always be the performer's the king and blah blah blah. And it's actually, well, I don't know about how much I believe in that. I believe that the listener you're making a contract with the listener, and therefore, if you want someone to listen to your record, you need to make a deal with them. You've got to give them a reason to listen to your record.
Yeah, I think from art's point of view, our culture has got the balance a little bit wrong. Like everything it's logical and it's non-intuitive now. Everything's got to be logicalized and analyzed, and I'm not turning my nose at that at all, because the fact that we can communicate across the country now through a computer is a product of that way of thinking. But I think we've kind of fooled ourselves into thinking that everything we do is made from executive order, from the top down, from from logic all the way down. We can just tell our body to do whatever we want it to do. We can tell it how to feel and so on. And it's just not true. The role of intuition is overwhelming in what most people do. The role of intellect is minuscule.
yeah. And I think there's stuff that you learn. Certainly when you're creating, there's patterns that you're going to work, and that's the But if you don't leave room for that stuff where you're just reacting, then that's where. And you talked about the unpredictability and that kind of like novelty. If you don't allow some of that in, then if it's all pre-planned and really, where's the room for the heart to walk around? Where's the room for the kind of like, I'm going to let the create. And I suppose that's why, back to our point, we talk about collaboration. Why collaboration is so exciting, because in a way, even if I am writing, if I say maybe write an instrumental and it's quite structured because it needs to be 16 bars long in the verse, and it's got 4-bar intro, and I've done all this stuff, then I can give it to Narelle. And that's where I'm kind of opening doors for like, okay, we've done all the kind of like thinking about the music production, the genre, and the kind of style we want to do it in. We've thought about the structure, go. And then Narelle comes up with this melody, and it's like that's where the magic walks in, and you kind of go, that's where it was. That's what it was waiting for. It was waiting for that little bit of unpredictability.
Yeah, well, most people in education get this as well. It's when you're trying to learn something, it starts with kind of you being very logical. If you're trying to learn the piano, say, you're thinking very consciously about where your fingers are supposed to move and when. But then at some point, the things that used to be intellectual become internalized, and they just become intuitive, and you know where the fingers are supposed to move, but you're not really thinking about it. And then something else, it frees up room for you to then analyze something else. And it's supposed to be this feedback loop from intellect to intuition over and over again. It's supposed to keep doing that. That's how we do stuff. And I think that it's almost like culturally, on a cultural level only, not on a personal level, but on a cultural level only, we've forgotten that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, and we sort of like the kind of like, because because as much as I can be, because I'm quite pragmatic about creativity and have quite a pragmatic nature, I also believe that there needs to be those people who are on, and I'm not that person. I'm never going to be that person. Or I don't say never, but I'm certainly not that person at the moment, of those people that are on the boundaries of creativity, and they're doing stuff that it's making you going, like, probably people are going, what the fuck is that? And then, but then, they push the boundaries for us, and you think about people like, I don't know, I think about people like Public Enemy, when they first arrived in their kind of barrage of noise, you think about, Björk, and those kind of like outliers who've just kind of, and become part of the canon, who we now see as part of the makeup, but people who deeply upset and offended people, and like even like Verdi, when he was writing operas, riots in the street about what he was writing, and now he's seen as part of an elitist art movement, like and that's and which has shown how where opera's become, because it's been around so long. It's just it's now part of the almost like the old landscape, but at one point they were the cutting edge. Jazz, which we now see as kind of slightly highbrow and a bit, we're very sniffy about jazz now, especially in this country. It's still not cool to like jazz. You're a bit of a, it's kind of, I actually do. I look, jazz is great, and I love jazz, and I think we need to stop being dickheads in this country about it, because it's brilliant. Not all of it, but then not all of anything's brilliant. No genre is 100% brilliant. But those artists were like, some of those guys were like pushing it to the extreme. Coltrane, Love Supreme, which is now seen as a classic, was like, people were like, what the fuck is this, when he came out with it? It's like, so we do need those people. I'm not one of those people. I'm those people following way behind in the background going, I've made this, it sounds a bit like it.
I guess I was thinking of something else as well in addition to that, which was with the cultural thing. At least it's almost like art is treated, or it's regarded as, a second-class citizen to the STEM subject sometimes. And I've had this conversation before, and I completely understand why you would think that the STEM subjects are more important. They might lead to more jobs. They might lead to a better income in the modern age. But it just seems like, yeah, but that's not everything. And actually, you do all of those things better. Like, the arts is it's something else. It's another kind of thing. And I think it's been diminished in the cultural way of looking at things. We kind of look at it as, oh, well, but it can't make money as easily, or it can't cure cancer, so it's not worth doing. And for me, it's like, what happens when you diminish that in a culture is that you make everybody in that culture, or a large percentage of people, lose any sense of meaning in the work that they're doing and the lives that they're leaving. And I mean, I'm not saying it's a well-developed theory and that's right, but we do see that in the world now, like a loss of meaning.
I think even if you're going to be like super kind of like, what does the arts give you? If you make kids do drama, for instance, like, well, they're not going to become actors. What's the point? It's like, that's not the point. The point is, what you're doing is getting young people able to express themselves, to work in groups, to communicate. There's what are called the soft skills, which really annoys me as a phrase, because actually they're core skills, which is the ability to have a conversation, the ability to analyze, to be, to look at something and go, oh yeah, I never thought of it like that. To work with people that maybe you never would have set foot in a room with before, and music is a similar thing. That kind of collectivism. It's interesting, because one of the things that one of the things that my pet hates is that men of my age, particularly men of my age, in their mid-40s say, oh, music's not as good as it used to be, which is utter bullshit. And then they also go, music doesn't mean as much to young people as it does. No, music doesn't mean as much to you as it used to. And you aren't connected with youth culture anymore. Young people still absolutely love music. And one of the things that are lambasted at young people is that there isn't the musical tribalism there used to be. Oh, the music was part of your identity. It was really great. And now kids don't have that. Kids don't have that because kids are smarter now. They realize that you can listen to you can go and listen to a trap record and then go and listen to a singer-songwriter record and then not be a conflict within that, because we were so binary in the way we were brought up. And so as much as you can kind of bemoan, I think kids are smarter than we are. I really do. I think the next generation are going to be better than we are. And like, having spent time with sort of 17, 18, 19, 20-year-olds, and you realize the breadth of music they listen to, and they don't hang their identity on that music because they don't see why they should. They don't see why you can't listen to a grime record, and then listening to by a Riot Girl band, like they don't see that as like as binary. They see it as part of the same conversation. And that's really heartening. I find that really heartening.
I feel like for music especially, well, for music exclusively, that relationship to music is like a non-tribal view of music is much healthier because it's a kind of cultivating a feeling of like openness. And I think, maybe I'm wrong there. I should redact that and say that actually I just think in general that is a better way of doing things.
Yeah, it is a better way of doing things because if we're gonna do that, because basically a lot of those assumptions were built on class and they were built on ethnic background or gender, or so you listen to Riot Girl if you were an angry white girl, that was the kind of thing. You listen to hip hop if you were a black kid. You listen to indie if you were a teenage kid from the suburbs. That was the musical I had people grew up in the 90s listening to hip hop, and I genuinely had. Someone once said to me, "Why are you listening to music that's out to get you?" I was like, "Are you fucking kidding me?" I'm like, genuinely, that was the attitude of it towards it. And yet now I meet 20-year-olds, and you say, I'd say to people in 1994, "Oh, Nas, Mike by Nas," and they'd go, "What the fuck is that? And who's he?" And and now you say Illmatic to a 20-year-old now, and they're like, "Oh, it's a classic," and you're like, because they see that stuff as and because they've grown up and they've assimilated the stuff that we were maybe marginalized and have embraced it, and hindsight is great, and we look back on things and go, oh, maybe we shouldn't have been so disrespectful of those kind of musics. Even with I remember in the 90s, so I keep talking about the 90s, but like when David Bowie, I'm sorry, I'm really rabbiting here, but David Bowie, I remember David Bowie in the 90s, I remember Let's Dance was seen as like the devil album. It was seen as the bastard album of David Bowie. Like, people wouldn't talk about Let's Dance. Oh, David Bowie's great, but don't mention Let's Dance. Now, because fortunately we have a revisionist society, and I actually think that's a good thing. We've gone back and go, we were all dickheads. This record's clearly amazing. Nile Rodgers is a genius. David Bowie's a genius. And rather than the usual thing when two geniuses work and it cancels each other out and it becomes crap, they were both geniuses together, and we got Let's Dance, which is amazing. I've really gone off the point there.
No, but you've given me a little nugget of hope there, because I hadn't really ever clocked that cosmopolitan view of appreciation of music in the youth. I hadn't really noticed that, but I think you're right, and that does give me hope that the next generation of music will be great.
Yeah, I think it will be, because they're much more. They're just fearless, man. They're like, I remember being in on a bus with a band, and we were going to Brighton, and Elephant Trees, and the music these four kids played, it was everything. I mean, they were listening to everything from hardcore punk to like proper down mumblecore hip hop, and they just, I mean, like everything, like then just straight indie bangers, and like, and then like Dua Lipa, and like everything. They were just vibing off everything, and like I was just like, yeah, this is great. This is great. And I'm really, and I'm also a really big believer that because we demonize young people so much as well, and like, I'm really excited the fact, my kids, for instance, that I'm able, as a parent, to give them Spotify and go, hey kids, there's the entire world of music. Go crazy. And they will find whatever they want. And it's gonna and I hope they're gonna find stuff that I hate, that I'm like, what is this? Like, I'm so excited about that. Like, this is just noise. The minute I say that phrase, I'm just it's gonna be brilliant. Just can't
Grandad.
wait.
All right, Grandad.
Yeah. All right, Grandad. Whatever you say, Grandad. Yeah.
Okay, well, listen, I think that comes to a nice end on a kind of message of hope there. So
there you go. Well, quite right too.
Yeah, let's leave it there. Where can people find everything you're doing?
You can go to, if you're looking for my kind of songwriting, a lot of my production on there as well. If you go to feelgoodmusicpublishing.com, that's all my stuff. If you want to find out of me as a producer, it's edheatonproducer.co.uk, I think. And then I'm on the socials. All those things are on the socials, as everything is nowadays. But yeah.
Well, this was a pleasure.
It's been lovely. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. And thank you for listening to my waffles. I hope people have made it to the end, to the hopeful bit.
I love a good waffle, so it's fine.
Thank you. Good.